From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your host, Sean Fazende. Riding shotgun with me, as he does each and every podcast, is Andre Johnson Jr. Remember, the Junior Senior will not be happy with you. Before we get into this morning's fire content, be sure to like, share, rate, review. If you are watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Get the bell notification for when we drop the fire content. And yes, we have some fire content for you here today. First off, we apologize, technical difficulties. We could not do the live stream last night, but we still have a podcast to speak with you about, and it is a very, very, very important one. The Saints have made their first round selection. The NFL draft's first round has come and gone, and the Saints went to the line of scrimmage to their biggest need with their selection. And that is where we're going to start with our big picture.
Of course, where else could we start but Taliese Fuaga, the big right tackle out of Oregon State. He played a lot of, like I mentioned, right tackle. A lot of the guys the Saints were looking at played at left tackle. He played on the right side, and we'll get into what that means later in this podcast. But the biggest thing about the big guy, he allowed 0 sacks, Sean, in 2 seasons. Very effective with the Beavers over at Oregon State. Now, the way this draft board unfolded was a bit unique and a little unexpected in a few ways. So when you saw Taliese Fuaga was the pick,
Taliese Fuaga.
Whoa.
That's what I was told today. Taliese Fuaga.
We got to get that down.
Get your
Saints
pronunciation guides ready and understand that it's a unique name, but it's one we're going to have to learn and we're going to master. Taliese Fuaga. All right, so here we go. We did a podcast on potential prospects at 14 at the tackle position. Fuaga's name came up. I did a story on the Fox 8 News at 5, the Sportscast, where I listed 4 potential options at 14. Fuaga's name came up. We did another podcast where we were just breaking down prospects and we were kind of ranking them with potential players. At 14, Fuaga's name was there. His name was everywhere. So the fact that he and the Saints connected was completely unsurprising. If you recall, though, when we were going through our options for potential who could potentially be available and who could be the best fit, the one thing that was a drawback for me was that he only played on the right side. 700 snaps last year, all at the right side. 25 starts, all at the right side. But that was the only drawback that I didn't like, but I still liked him as a prospect. Now, as for what they did Thursday night at pick 14 is simply a matter of let's not overthink this. The grade of the prospect matched the need. He's available. He's steady. He's safe. He's solid. It's a straightforward selection to go and get Taliese Fuaga. And he checks a lot of boxes. He has a lot of starts. He's incredibly productive in both the run game and the pass game. 25 career starts at right tackle. He's been unbelievably durable the last 2 years, and that's something that this offense rarely needs, desperately needs when you talk about what he can bring for some durability, hopefully, to the Saints organization, in particular at that position. So he checks a lot of boxes. He's a very clean prospect. In fact, Dennis Allen spoke about that, and then he spoke about his personality. He's a man's man, a guy's guy, a dude's dude. I think that was the exact phrasing of Dennis Allen when he spoke to the media after the selection. Dennis Allen was very excited about the selection, and you can see why. So all in all, they got a guy who they feel like is going to be productive on the field, healthy, good personality, a tough, rugged personality on a football field, but a guy that seems to get along well with his peers. And he also said this, not just a good personality, but a culture-building personality. That jumped out to me like that bright red light when it's kind of going off, like we're in the studio and the lights come on when your mic is hot. Because the culture has eroded a little bit, and they need some type of players that can come in and help rebuild some of that culture. And it's got to be some young, self-starting guys. And I think Fuaga is one that they feel like can certainly add to that mix. So, biggest need, highest graded, it matched up. don't overthink this thing. The Saints got a prospect that really it's pretty risk free if you really think about it. It's a pretty clean selection all the way around, and I guess I got to say, job well done by the Saints.
Yeah, I mean, we had pinpointed offensive tackle as the team's number one need. They addressed that number one need. They got an offensive tackle. Now, what was so interesting to me is the offensive tackle that they got, because in your first mock draft and the guy in many mock drafts that was getting projected to be picked by the Saints,
you know it.
That was Olu Fashanu, who wound up getting picked, I believe it was 11th overall.
To the New York Jets.
Yeah, to the Jets. We knew Joe Alt wouldn't be there, but the Fashanus of the world, the J.C. Lathams of the world,
was another name, yes.
Those were two names that we both talked about on this podcast as potential picks for the Saints, potential left tackles for the Saints. J.C. Latham actually got picked in the top 10. Fashanu gets drafted at 11. Another guy we talked about, Brock Bowers, he almost falls to the Saints.
We're going to get that in a second.
Yeah, we'll get to that. And the Saints almost had a very difficult pick to make. But I think the second big point we'll get into is kind of the plug-and-play nature of Fuaga. And when we get into that, you mentioned that he played a lot of right tackle, didn't really get to play any left tackle. But that's not a position he's afraid of. During his post-draft Zoom call, what he said is, quote, some say it's like driving on the other side of the freeway, but to me, it's the same exact thing as the right side. Basically, you just flip it to the left. He went on to say that he's excited. Playing the left side is a fresh challenge that he's looking forward to. He didn't play left tackle at Oregon State, but since leaving there in the offseason and draft training period, he has taken a lot of reps on that left side. So Fuaga, like we said, didn't play the left side, but he's excited to get out there and potentially compete for that job.
It's interesting to hear him say it's easy for him to go right to left, because everyone told me it's actually that's the more difficult part.
Yeah.
When I talked to, James Hurst was the guy I always point out, because I remember specifically asking him about that in training camp last year. He said it was harder right to left, not going from tackle to guard. But anyway, back to the topic at hand with Fuaga and the idea of, okay, you draft this guy, 14th overall selection in a class full of offensive tackles. DA said they felt very, very, very confident that one of those guys would be available at 14. We don't know where Fuaga landed in their hierarchy of tackles. We'll never know. We don't really have to know. But safe to say, he was still high enough to where when their pick came around, it was not going to be a drop off with the graded prospects. They said as much. It married together. So that leads us to this. Plug and play. Taliese Fuaga, is he a day one starter? Tell me why he shouldn't be.
He kind of has to.
Tell me why he shouldn't be. That has to be the plan. He has to be able to be a day one starter, especially given the Saints' current predicament up front. It's fair to suggest that Fuaga should be in the mix for immediate playing time, like right away in mini camp and OTAs and into training camp. It's not always easy. We know that. It's not always easy to be a day one starter, but Jari Evans did it in 2006. Ryan Ramczyk did it in 2017. And then Eric McCoy did it in 2019. To me, if you're going to draft a first-round selection at 14, you are drafting him with the expectation that he is going to be productive and productive quickly, especially the last time you invested this position in a rookie. He's been anything but that.
Exactly.
Okay, he needed development. He hasn't gotten it. He's been unhealthy. Now you have a guy that's got a ton of development at a Power 5 school, both run blocking and pass blocking, and he's been healthy. Knock on wood. Knock on that for me.
Real
yes.
wood, people.
That's real wood. So, to me, it's not just you got a quality tackle. You got a quality tackle where somewhere on that page, we expect him to get started really quickly his rookie year. And that's what they have to that has to happen along the line of scrimmage with these guys, because far too long it's been too long of development, not just offensive line, but defensive line as well. Marcus Davenport wasn't ready day one. Peyton Turner wasn't ready day one. Penning wasn't ready day one. That's got to stop.
Oh, yeah,
that's got to stop. Fuaga has to stop that trend, and hopefully he's the next guy that comes in, plug and play, ready to go from day one.
He's got to be, because if you look at the projected starting offensive line for the Saints right now, you've got Trevor Penning at left tackle. You've got Ali Udo or Nick Saldivari at left guard. Eric McCoy at center, Cesar Ruiz at the other guard, and you could probably plug Fuaga in at right tackle, assuming Ryan Ramczyk really can't play. And, I mean, if not Fuaga, you've got Landon Young.
Yeah.
But you don't have many options right now on that offensive line. And Dennis Allen mentioned he liked how deep this class was, so that's why he wasn't more aggressive in searching out offensive linemen throughout the free agency. Now, I question whether or not he knew the severity of Ryan Ramczyk's injury back then, or knew that James Hurst was going to retire, because maybe that would have changed his outlook. But, I mean, Fuaga's, and it's an unfortunate position to be in for a rookie in some ways, but Fuaga's going to have to come in and be ready to play day one. And another guy who's going to have to be ready to play day one, we talked about it on Wednesday. Well, it's not day one for him, it's day 3 for him, but it's Trevor Penning. And Trevor Penning is a guy who Dennis Allen talked about in his press conference at the end of the draft. He talked for about 28 minutes, and he mentioned he still believes that Trevor Penning can be a very good player in this league. He's very excited for Penning as a prospect. He says, and the most interesting part right here, he said his career was slowed down by injuries and development. Injury speaks for itself. The guy was hurt. Development, it's kind of the coaching staff for the Saints' job to develop
I think
him.
that was a shot at the former offensive line coach. I'm just to be honest with you.
Yeah.
That's what I took it as.
Yeah, so, I mean, Dennis Allen still believes, and you heard Mickey Loomis say it on Tuesday, the two of them are still very high on Trevor Penning. That is a guy they invested a first-round pick in, and you need him, especially where that's your weakest spot. Even after drafting Fuaga, you're going to need the Pennings of the world to step up and play a relevant role on that line.
1,000%. And we mentioned it the other day, like, figure it out, do it. And if you're the new coach, John Benton, coach that guy up. Because I'm with you. And we said it after the show last night, or during the show last night. The Saints have not given up on Trevor Penning. Why should they? Why should they? I mean, he didn't have a rookie year, and he wasn't ready last year because of, the injury set him back in his kind of development. And then when he tried to get developed, it wasn't developing fast enough, and felt like it was too much to risk with what they had planned for that season. Fine. So now you go into year 3, whole new coaching staff on that side of the ball. So yeah, I still believe not only does Penning still have a chance to resurrect his career, I think the Saints kind of need him to emerge as a starter. Yeah. As a starter, which I know y'all are going to leave comments saying that's foolish, that's crazy. I get it. I understand.
Your option's limited
But,
right now.
the Saints need that to happen. I mean, that's the best-case scenario if that were to happen. The question is, can it happen or will it happen? Well, we won't know that until the games start flying or the bullets start flying for real when the games start, obviously, in September. So, yeah, you're talking about an offensive line where we're going to see some youth. We're going to see some youth because James Hurst out. Ryan Ramczyk. I mean, look, the fact that they selected a guy where his sole college career was right tackle, that tells me as much as I need to know in terms of they are planning for life without Ryan Ramczyk. Because, yes, I think Fuaga can flip over to the left side, but to me it would be foolish to have him go left from day one. Let him see where he's at the right tackle position. So who else do you have? Like you said, you got Ali Udoh. You got Landon Young. Guy's never really been a starter. And you got Trevor Penning. Of those guys, who do you want to emerge? It's got to be Trevor Penning, and it's got to be Taliese Fuaga on the opposite side of him as well. And if that's not the case with either one of those guys, then you're dipping into a very thin group. What happens? What happens then? That's why I still think you're going to see some more investment in the offensive line in this draft.
Right, and speaking of this draft, it was a very exciting draft. Maybe it's because we've been doing so much build-up, but the draft was pretty exciting. Now, the first 5 picks went about as expected. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, who we'll talk about later, Drake May, Marvin Harrison, Joe Alt. I'll even say the 6th pick, Malik Neighbors. It got interesting at 7 when the Titans took J.C. Latham, because that's a guy who really flew up draft boards late in this process. Big shocker of the night, Atlanta, the Saints' biggest rival, drafting Michael Penix, going quarterback a couple months after they gave Kirk Cousins 4 years, $180 million. Then Odunze, the Vikings trade up for J.J. McCarthy. Another big shocker, at least for me, was the New York Jets, who had, for the most part, been penciled in to take Brock Bowers, took Alu Fashanu, the left tackle out of Penn State.
Who was the guy we had linked to the Saints all along.
Right. A guy who Sean Payton, notoriously known for not wanting to do anything with rookie quarterbacks, drafts Bo Nix. And then Brock Bowers goes the pick before the Saints at 13. Now, Sean, in your latest mock draft, Brock Bowers was mocked to the Saints, and we mentioned all throughout this process, yes, the Saints need a tackle, but if Brock Bowers makes it to 14, things going to get a little awkward. Do you think it was a realistic possibility that if he had dropped one more spot, the Saints, say, push that offensive tackle to the back burner, we got to take that guy?
I think it's very possible that would have been the pick. A very difficult decision would have been had. DA, it's almost like he didn't want to admit it, but he kind of got caught like in the moment speaking about him, so he kind of had to finish his thought. I think he was a strong consideration because I don't think they thought he was going to be there that long into the draft. And he was definitely in their cloud of players that would have been under strong consideration at 14 if he would have been available. But it became a moot point because Las Vegas, seeking the opportunity to get the top tight end in the class, they grabbed him out in Las Vegas for the Raiders, so congratulations to them. Man, when I tell you my phone blew up around pick 11, pick 12. Bowers is still available. Bowers is still available. The fans wanted Bowers, and if they would have picked him, there would have been some concern about not having a tackle, but man, it would have been hard to not get excited about Brock Bowers in black and gold. Instead, he's going to be silver and black. But you mentioned the board, because the board really developed uniquely tonight. 6 quarterbacks in the first 12 selections, so that's 6 spots that warrant a tackle. However, you like those odds, but still, 3 tackles went in the first, first 11 picks?
Yeah, 11 picks.
The first 11 picks, plus you had a couple of wide receivers. So while it wasn't, it was good that you had the receivers and the quarterbacks, you still had a lot of tackles go off the board. And like I said, we don't know the hierarchy of where they had those guys listed. But nonetheless, it put the Saints in a very unique position because by the time they were up at 14, there's no it's all offensive players that were taken. So anyone in the draft at that point had a chance to get their number 1 rated defensive player on their board at 14. Saints were open for business. I asked Dennis Allen about it. He said there was 1 or 2 scenarios they considered. It didn't come to fruition. Got asked about it again later in the press conference. Got a couple calls before they were on the clock. Sounds like they were strongly considering it, going back just a couple spots, like a spot or 2 to maybe grab an extra 3rd-round pick or a 4th-round pick or whatever the case may be. They answered the phone and they thought about it. But look, they're not used to taking those kind of phone calls. They're not used to saying yes to those kind of phone calls. So they stayed at 14 and got Taliese Fuaga. But think about that if you're the Saints, how much leverage that is. If all of a sudden 14 picks in and your number 1 defensive player is still available, and there are teams behind them that clearly need defensive players. I mean, somebody's going to take a defensive player, and you start getting a call from some of those teams knowing that the Saints need a tackle, and there was still Fuaga and Troy Fontana was still on the board as well. That would have been very interesting to see if they would have made that move. But nonetheless, they stayed in their lane. They made a nice, safe, nice, steady, nice, solid selection for their offensive line, and also their entire team. But the board really uniquely flowed in a lot of ways very much in the Saints' favor. Man, it would have been nice to see what that offer would have been. Let's just say going back from like 14 to 16, you probably would have got either Fontana or Fuaga, and you probably could have gained that 3rd-round pick or maybe even another 2nd-round pick. Who knows what the points will add up to. But I thought the board was very unique tonight. Not the Saints board, the draft board of the draft, because you'll never see 13 straight offensive players again. Right. Or I guess it was ended up being 14 straight offensive players again to start a draft in the NFL, not in our lifetime.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why if there's any disappointment that I had with the Saints board, it's that I believe they probably could have traded back a few picks and still gotten their guy. Now, obviously, I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that war room. Obviously, that offer didn't come in. The calls they did get were probably people from maybe a little further back trying to trade in, and the Saints didn't feel comfortable going that far back because another offensive lineman didn't get taken until 18. So if you're at 14 and you trade back to 16 or 17, you still ideally would have gotten Taliese Fuaga because Amarius Mims from Georgia, he was the next offensive lineman. Yeah, picked to Cincinnati at 18. Then Troy Fontana went to Pittsburgh at 20. Then you had Jordan Morgan, another guy we talked about, at 25. So if you just fall back a few spots, you probably could have still gotten the guy you wound up picking, And there would have been a situation where you can get at least into the third and the fourth round, because as we head into day 2, the Saints still have that pick 45, and there's still that gap all the way to the 5th round that they have not yet filled.
Yeah, I wonder how that goes later tonight, because if they were open to the idea at 14 and it just felt like first round pick, we're just gonna go and make this because we like this guy, he's here. Let's just not play around. Let's just get our guy now. But at 45, are you a little more willing because you kind of went through the process a little bit and you do have that hole? Now, we know they're going to move up from 5 to 4 with the 65 fifth-round picks that they have. They're going to figure out a way to get in the 4th round with that. But I'll be curious to see if they end up entertaining that idea in the 2nd round more, which has always been kind of floated out there. I know Jeff Duncan had really discussed that the 2nd round pick would be the one. And, I don't necessarily disagree. So it's been an interesting flow to the 1st round, but at the end of it all, the Saints addressed their biggest need, and they addressed their biggest need by drafting a player who had the comparable grade. It was not a reach for that need, and I think all in all, the Saints feel pretty good with where they stand with this draft so far.
Now, we do have 2 fan questions to get into, but before that, I have to ask you one more question.
Yes, sir.
We're heading into day 2 of the draft. The Saints addressed their biggest need on day 1. They got their offensive tackle. They still do have pick 45. Assuming they make pick 45, now that we've got offensive tackle out the way, where do you look next? I believe in your mock, you had them drafting a defensive lineman in the 2nd round when they drafted an offensive tackle in the 1st round. So do you look maybe defensive tackle, defensive end? Quarterback's off the board. We talked about quarterback at one point being a possibility.
Right, but those guys are all gone.
Yeah, they're all gone at this point. Or we also mentioned the Saints, they don't just need a offensive tackle. This is a team that could probably stand to draft multiple. So do you go back to that well on day 2 or go somewhere else?
What do the grades tell you? I mean, because now you're at the point now where you could certainly use another offensive lineman, and if you got a low 2, high a high 2, low 1 grade on a player, and take them. I would probably stay away from quarterback. In that mock where we had Fashanu, Braden Fisk was my 2nd round pick. I'd be fine with that. I'd be fine with that because you need another player up front of the defensive line of scrimmage. The safety position is one. And then look, what wide receivers are available? Because this is a deep class of wide receivers. Did the Georgia wide receiver get picked?
Ladd McConkey?
McConkey?
No, he's still there?
He's still there. There are other players still available. We'll see what happens at the tight end position, but it felt like there was a gap between the next tight end after Brock Bowers. So that would be it. I mean, I wouldn't be afraid of another offensive lineman, a defensive tackle, a wide receiver, and maybe a safety, depending on the grades.
Wide receivers still available: Adonai Mitchell from Texas, Ladd McConkey from Georgia, Keon Coleman from Florida State, a big guy that I think we both like. The 2 Washington receivers, Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan, Troy Franklin from Oregon, and Jerry Rice's son, Brendan Rice from USC.
And let me just say, we talked about plug-and-play instant guy with Fuaga. A lot of those guys I think could be plug-and-play. I mean, at the wide receiver position, I think they could play. I mean, another instant impact type player. That's what you need. That's what you want.
Because Olave is going to start. You can assume Rashid Shaheed's going to kind of be involved in that starting lineup. But after that, you've got a lot of guys on this roster, and you don't have a clear number 2 or number 3 guy.
And honestly, if they're active, they can get on the field, even if they're not quote-unquote starters. I mean, you can figure out a way, especially if you show up when it comes to training camp and preseason, those types of things. So I think there's another opportunity there. So
now, as we get into our fan questions, the final word questions, we've got 2 of them that came in tonight that caught our interest, so I figured we might as well read them. The first one coming from Darvel in Slidell. Nice little rhyme there. Are you surprised that the Saints passed on Dallas Turner, the defensive end from Alabama, at pick 14? Now, a few podcasts ago, we talked about Dallas Turner, how much the 2 of us liked him, and we said that if he fell to 14, the Saints might have a difficult decision to make. He wound up falling. The Saints, I'm sure, considered it, but they wound up going with their offensive tackle. Were you surprised that they didn't be the first team to take a defensive player off the board?
This to me feels like a classic case of Ty goes to the need. I think he was probably in their cloud of players, 3 or 4 players that were graded high enough to take, and then you look at what you have, what you need. Obviously, it wasn't just a need; it was a desperate need at the tackle position. So I'm not surprised they didn't take Dallas Turner. There's something else too, and we talked about this. It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, and as much as I loved Dallas Turner, I would have gladly taken him here. He doesn't fit the prototype. He doesn't fit the physical prototype, which is something I think they need to change.
Yeah.
But if they don't have to change, sometimes it's hard to pull away from that. So, and when you had Fuaga available, no, not surprised. Now, we said there had to have been a discussion. If that would happen with us in the war room, we would have to have a discussion. I'm sure they had a discussion about that. I mean, their number 1 graded defensive player, whoever that was available versus your, I don't know, whatever your offensive, whatever you had Fuaga on your offensive side of the ball. So, not surprising, but I would have loved to have seen some of the conversation when they were up and those players were available.
Definitely, and like you said, I think it really just came down to, you heard me name the offensive linemen that they've got, and there's not many guys that I named that you would consider surefire starters. But you look at the defensive line, especially the end position. You've got Chase Young, who is expected to be ready for day one. You've got Cam Jordan, one of the greatest Saints of all time. You've got Carl Granderson, who was arguably their best defensive player last season. And then you've got a consistent guy who always manages to get on the field, make a play here and there, Tano Passigno. You've got Peyton Turner, a guy you used the first-round pick on not too long ago. And you've got Isaiah Foskey, a player who you used the second rounder on, who
a high second rounder,
who is supposed to be a big-time pass rusher, who you haven't gotten to see that from yet. So when it came down to it, Dallas Turner for sure would have helped this team, but the defensive end room is stacked. The offensive line room is not. You had to go with your offensive lineman.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, when it settled up the way it did, I think the more likely scenario would have been to not draft a defensive player, instead trade back for someone else that has a more urgent need for a defensive player. But never happened. Anything else?
Second question.
Okay.
From Brandon in Terrytown.
T-Town, what?
This one's for the LSU fans. Do you like the landing spots of Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas? Now, quarterback Jaden Daniels, he was drafted to the Washington Commanders. Wide receivers, Malik Neighbors, drafted to the New York Giants. Brian Thomas, drafted later in the first to the Jacksonville Jaguars. How you feeling about those 3?
Well, look, Jaden's going to be a day 1 starter. I think everyone knew that. It was really trending in that direction, Jaden going to Washington. And, look, they don't have anyone else that they can really just, you know, be a veteran bridge. I think he's going to be the guy from day 1. So he's going to get on the field. So good luck. And I think it's a team that had some issues last year, but you know, they're trying to fix their culture. It's new ownership. It's all those things. So, I'm glad he went high. I'm glad he went second, not third, because I know there was a little bit of debate about that. But like I said, it really trended in that direction, so I wasn't surprised. Malik Neighbors, interesting, just because of the Daniel Jones situation. And that market is brutal, and it's tough, and people are starved for success, and they love you one minute, they hate you the next. But you're a receiver. You're only as good sometimes as the quarterback throwing you the ball. And if you get Daniel Jones from 2 years ago, maybe you got a chance. If you get Daniel Jones from last year, I just don't think it's going to feel right. But the one that I think cashed in was Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, I think he had the best landing spot of all. Go right into Jacksonville, got an offensive-minded head coach, got a young stud quarterback, a great place to play ball. He's from the South. It's a cool city to be. It's a cool city to live in. So I think in a very winnable division, well, maybe not winnable, but not very winnable, but in a good division, and I think he can really shine in Jacksonville. So I really like where Brian Thomas Jr. landed.
Right, and as I go through the 3, Jaden Daniels, I think he needs to thank his lucky stars that he wound up in Washington and not New England, because you look at the help that he would have had in New England, and it's not a lot of help, not a lot of weapons to throw to. In Washington, he does have Terry McLaurin. He has the running back, Brian Robinson, a young guy who has been playing pretty well the last few years. They also brought in another running back in Austin Eckler, a veteran who's been playing at a high level for a long time, drafted in the same class as Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey. So JD, he's going to have an opportunity to step in day one. They traded their starter from last year away, Sam Howell, already. Yeah. So JD's going to step in day one. He's got a good supporting cast. Now, that's a tough division. You talk about divisions. The NFC East is brutal with the Cowboys and the Eagles, but Jaden Daniels is going to have an opportunity to come in and play, and the Commanders do play in New Orleans next year, so you'll get to see him up close and personal if you're a LSU Tiger fan that goes to a lot of Saints games. Malik Neighbors to New York. Not crazy about the quarterback situation, whether it winds up being Tommy DeVito.
They tried to move up. They tried to move up to get Drake May.
They did.
But New England wanted to stay at 3.
But the least I can say is he's going to get a lot of targets out there. It's not like there's another wide receiver that dominates touches. Their best pass catcher is probably an aging Darren Waller. So at the very least, Malik Neighbors is going to get a lot of looks. He'll probably be in that Rookie of the Year conversation just off sheer numbers that he could put up in that offense. But I agree with you. I think Brian Thomas Jr. to Jacksonville is a great pick.
I think he killed it.
Yeah, the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to throw the ball. Trevor Lawrence is going to sling that ball over the field. And it's interesting because Calvin Ridley did just leave.
Yeah.
So there is a gap for Brian Thomas to step in. Now, they do have Christian Kirk over there. Christian Kirk will probably be the number 1 to start the season, but Brian Thomas can realistically step in and win that number 2 job in a prolific passing offense. And Calvin Ridley, he didn't necessarily live up to maybe what the expectations were last year. But I think that Brian Thomas, coming from a prolific passing offense at LSU, stepping into another one, I think it's a really good spot for him. I like the landing spots for the 3 Tigers. The worst one, I guess you could say, is Malik Neighbors. But if we want to be honest about it, I don't know how long Daniel Jones and Tommy DeVito are going to be there.
Yeah,
so considering that they'll probably be in the top 10 again next year.
Exactly, and they'll be back in the market for a quarterback at that point. So you got to go with it. You got to roll with it. You never know what can happen. But what we do know now is the Saints address their biggest need. They got Taliese Fuaga. Taliese, is that how you say it? Yes. Yep. Taliese Fuaga.
We'll practice.
Yes, we're going to get it. We're going to get it right. It's going to be fluid for us. And, we'll see where it goes, but hopefully they got their a starting tackle for quite some time. Again, very solid, very clean, very good selection for the Saints, and they didn't overthink it. They just went with the obvious selection. I think it's going to do it for us tonight.
Yep.
All right.
Long night.
It's been a long, long one here. Hope you enjoyed it. We will be back for round 2 Friday, not in the podcast form, but check us out on Fox 8. I will be there live. I guess, yeah. I'll be there live 4, 5, 9, and 10. So check it out. We'll see what the Saints do in rounds 2, and who knows? Maybe they get a 3rd round pick. We don't know. But anyway, that'll do it for us tonight. For Andre Johnson Jr., I am Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.